Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to continue our discussion with mental illnesses in fiction, particularly on substance abuse, and talk about some of the specific substances that come up. And of course, there's far too many of them. Again, this is one of those topics I could easily make a whole channel about, so we're going to touch on the highlights of some of the more, I guess, common ones, as well as some of the more interesting ones. Because again, this is sort of about fiction and that sort of thing. And so probably the most common of them all is alcohol addiction. It is, if you live in a Western country, particularly the United States, alcohol is generally legal, freely available. Some more than not. But it's very common and it's very socially acceptable, which is probably one of the reasons why alcoholism is so prevalent. Is it kind of sneaks up on you. If you're going out with friends after work and you have a few too many, people just kind of blow it off and, oh, well, that's just Rick, he likes the beer. But you can pull out a needle and you start strapping on a tourniquet on your elbow. People are like, whoa, dude, what are you doing? But alcohol, no. And alcohol is encouraged. It's advertised all over the place. And so it's very common. And alcohol is really the worst of all the drugs. Worse than heroin, worse than meth. Mainly because, and I always kind of define this for one simple reason, is that alcohol is one of the few drugs that will actually kill you just from the withdrawals alone. Benzodiazepines are the other class. Those are like Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin, that sort of thing. If you're familiar with Jordan Peterson, he really struggled to get off of benzos because they were being overprescribed, and he just kind of went along with whatever his doctor said. My guess is partly there's probably a lot of reasons why that, but anyway. But alcohol is one of those that the withdrawals alone can kill you. It's why, for me, treating people with alcoholism is a little tricky, because what I want to tell them is just quit drinking. Quit drinking right now. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. Let's go move right into sobriety. Let's just build the structures that we need to get sober. But if they've been drinking too much and for too long, that alone could kill them. Even if they're highly motivated, even if they're like, yeah, I'm ready to do this, I just want to get off this shit, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, as we like to say, then, even then I have to tell them you have to titrate it back. That's one of the few, alcohol's one of the few drugs where I will be more likely to recommend someone to go to either medical detox or some sort of inpatient treatment to wean themselves off properly, because, it's just lethal alone. Heroin might make you wish you were going to die when you quit using it. And usually, if someone does die from the withdrawals of heroin, it's actually usually dehydration. They vomit a lot, they get diarrhea, so they're very dehydrated, and that's what actually causes them to die. And of course, depending on how bad their heroin addiction is, they're going into these withdrawals already not in good physical condition. And so that's usually it. But usually heroin withdrawals just make you wish you would die, but you're actually not going to die. Meth, as horrible of a drug as it is, you just quit using it, and you're done. You'll probably sleep for about 3 days because your body is trying to come down from the high, from the massive stimulants. But in general, quitting stimulants, cocaine and meth and that sort of thing, kind of easy. If you're going to do any of this, and by the way, for medical reasons, if you're going to do any of this, definitely talk to a professional, because I'm talking in broad general terms. You specifically may have some health problems that you need to consider, but in general, getting off of other drugs is a lot easier than getting off of alcohol. And again, because it's also socially acceptable and stuff, it can be a little harder to find, outlets where alcohol is just not a factor. In fact, it's almost impossible in most places. Every time one of my clients goes to fill up his gas tank, he knows he can walk right into the convenience store and buy another 6-pack of beer or a bottle of wine or whatever else. Whereas someone who's wanting to quit the harder drugs, I had one client, she just moved. She was young. She was like 19, 20, very pretty. And guys would just text her saying, "Hey girl, I got some blow. You want to party?" Because they're hoping to get laid, and and so that she didn't have to go looking for the drugs. The drugs were looking for her. And so what she finally did, and she just actually emailed me after the fact, or called me after the fact, and just said, "I've moved to some other city. I can't remember what city it was. I'm living with my aunt where I don't know anyone and no one knows me, and so now I can get sober." And I've never heard from her, but my fingers crossed that was what it took to help her get sober, which is to get away from it. So why do people drink? That's a pretty broad one. In general, alcohol is a sort of numbing effect to it. There is a euphoric part too. Some people, alcohol is really weird because everybody's body is different. Sometimes it acts like a stimulant. Some people get super hyper. That's why people get like angry and they want to fight all the time, or they want to party and dance and just go all night. Me, I go to sleep. I'm done. I'm knocked out. And so part of the reason why people use alcohol kind of depends on how their body reacts to it, and therefore what it does for them. But for most of my clients, a lot of them drink because they just want to numb out, and they just don't want to think, and they don't want to feel the anxiety or the fear, or they want to slow down their thoughts. I just need something to pass the time. Boredom is still one of the leading causes of relapse. People just get bored. There's nothing else to do. And if they've never had any sort of hobbies or anything else to fill their time, getting drunk is pretty easy, right? You just pop open one and start drinking. So for most of my clients, that's usually what we're dealing with. What I'm finding I'm helping with is that alcohol is a way for them to sort of dissociate from their problems. That's why I call it a dissociative, although that's not really like an official term, but that's one of the reasons why. And so if you're going to talk about a character in your fiction who drinks too much, again, you always have to go back to why are they doing this? What is it doing for them? Because that will help, with the character arc, that'll help give a good explanation of why do they keep doing this. Because if you're going to write a character drinks too much, you're going to need to also stick in all these negatives, and then and then explain to the reader why do they keep doing this despite fill in the blank. Because if you've never been an addict, you don't understand that logic, or in my case, if you haven't worked with addicts. And so for somebody on the outside, it's too easy just to say, well, just quit doing that. It's because it's doing something for them, and we have to figure out what it's doing for them as well. And so with alcohol, that's usually a thing. People can drink day and night. They don't have to go searching for it too hard. It can just be a simple trip down to the convenience store, or pick up an extra bottle at the drugstore or whatever else. I mean, it kind of depends on your area as to how readily available. I believe in like Utah, last I heard, I haven't been to Utah, there's just like government-owned stores that sell alcohol, which is just kind of weird. But you're allowed to go, that's where you're allowed to go get it. You just can't necessarily walk into a convenience store and buy beer. Last I heard. If you're from Utah, let me know in the comments. Whereas in Texas, you can get pretty much anything everywhere except for hard liquor. That has to be sold in a liquor store. But you can get beer and wine at convenience stores, grocery stores, drug stores. I think that's about it. And so that's another aspect of how common it is. Now you compare that to something like heroin. Heroin, very hard drug. Most people don't even inject heroin. Most people will smoke it or sometimes eat it, although that's kind of... I see a lot more smokers nowadays. They might take prescription drug pills, but they also may just like inject themselves with regular old heroin. And again, most heroin addicts don't seem to really like any other drugs, from my experience at least. Once they've discovered heroin, that's it. Nothing else takes the place of heroin. They don't really drink that much. They don't really smoke weed that much. Nothing else really does it for them except heroin. And so heroin can be, again, from social standpoint, it's not socially acceptable. It's highly illegal. It's illegal everywhere. In some places, even having the stuff to use heroin is illegal. The paraphernalia, as we call it. And so heroin addicts tend to hide what they're doing a lot more, whereas alcoholics can be in plain sight, or not, depends. But heroin addicts tend to hide quite a bit. Because of that, they tend to associate with a lot of other drug addicts, and so they kind of know that. Their drugs cannot be gotten legally except for prescription drugs, and even those have to usually be, even though the prescription drug is legal, it may not be legal for them to have it. And so someone gets a prescription, they sell it to somebody else, and so there's a lot of still trading and stuff going on. And because of that, that's sort of where you get in the realm of people lie to each other a lot. They steal from each other. Someone will call each other their friend, but then they'll steal all their money because they want to go buy drugs and get high. That can also be where women tend to start, prostituting themselves because they need their drugs, and the only way they can get money is to do that. And so for a really bad drug habit like heroin and meth to some degree, it can take over their life to where that is what they spend most of their day trying to do. They don't function very well. They can in the earlier stages of their addiction, but they can reach a point to where pretty much they basically are getting high or trying to get high, and that's their life for a little while, and everything else just sort of falls by the wayside. And again, addictions are all a continuum. Some people can abuse the drugs on the weekends but get by with it and still function throughout the rest of the week. But from one of the aspects of addiction is this buildup of tolerance to where people need more and they need more often, and that's where it starts to take over. And so that's something that needs to be put into your fiction if you're going to have a heroin addict is how often are they trying to use it. Also, heroin has a very high relapse rate. There's something about that drug that really pulls people in. I remember seeing an interview or reading an interview with a recovered heroin addict, and he had like 10 years sobriety under his belt, and he said still every day, at least once during that day, my brain will go, maybe I'll use today. And I'll just push that aside. It just gets easier to push that thought aside, but it never 100% goes away. Something similar with eating disorders when we talk about anorexia as well. And so it's just really easy just to fall back onto those drugs. Meth is a horrible drug. It's a vile drug. It's a drug made from shit you have under your kitchen sink. It tears away at the body. It is almost, like heroin, you can recreationally use meth, but it tends to kind of creep in and start to take over a little bit more and a little bit more. It is highly, highly toxic. When you see people with all the lesions and stuff, or they have this gray skin, they've lost a lot of weight. Well, the weight loss is from hyperstimulation, but that's all those things. That's their body trying to process all the toxins that they put in from the meth. But meth is a very powerful stimulant. It's kind of the same realm of crack, except crack is made from cocaine, and meth is just some cooked up in a lab, basically. Much like heroin, meth is not socially acceptable. It is, it's kind of hard to describe if it's easier or harder to get, because meth can be cooked up pretty much anywhere. Meth was the first drug that came from the rural areas and moved into the urban areas, whereas most drugs start off in the urban areas and move out to the rural areas. But meth was the one because the fumes and the toxicity are just so god-awful that it's hard to cook them up in a bathroom in an apartment building because people complain about the smell. But if you do it in a trailer out in the middle of nowhere, no one's around to complain about the smell. If you remember Breaking Bad, that was one of the reasons they had to take the RV out in the desert and make the stuff, was because it would stink so bad, and they had to cover themselves in the hazmat suit, basically, that sort of thing. And that does really infect everything. As when I was a CPS investigator, I had to we would get calls from meth houses, and a lot of times there's kids involved, and everybody in the house would test positive for meth, including the infants, because the shit was just in the air and it would just soak into their skin. And it was really sad because when we removed the kids from the home, normally what we want to do is let them take some stuff with them, take some clothes, take a teddy bear, take pictures of your family, take something because we want them to still have that connection to their family. But with meth, you can't take anything. It's all toxic. It's all been infected with the fumes and the crap like that. And so basically the kid leaves with the clothes on his back, and then when he gets to the foster care, we take the clothes off of his back and throw them in the garbage or burn them because it's just so toxic. So from a meth standpoint with fiction, I hate to say it, but probably they make good villains. People who have abused meth for a very long time. One of my clients put it this way. I think actually it was the same girl I was just describing. She went to a place to buy meth because that was one of her drugs. And she remembered being very afraid because she was afraid she was not going to get out of that house, not without being sexually assaulted. And the way she put it was like, people who use, and especially people who make and sell meth, they just don't have a soul anymore. There's just something about that drug that seems to eat away at one's conscience. Or maybe people had very little conscience and they got into that drug, but it's hard. It's a very ugly drug. And so, again, like with the heroin, it will kind of take over people's lives. Another drug that kind of takes over people's lives, but we don't talk about it as much. It's almost become politically incorrect to talk about this, but it's weed, marijuana. Marijuana is addictive. Don't believe the hype. It is not addictive like these other drugs that we've talked about. Marijuana doesn't have a physical addiction. It does have a very strong psychological addiction. It is a depressant. It will interfere with your ability to sleep, just like alcohol. It will sap your motivation, sap your ability to sort of really focus and want to get things done. It really does just kind of make you want to just sit around and do nothing. And again, weed, kind of like with alcohol, is if you do it once on like a Saturday night, because you're bored and you want to watch Cartoon Network and giggle or whatever. Yeah, it's not a big deal. But for a lot of my clients, weed takes over their life in a very small, incremental kind of way. It becomes their only coping mechanism. That's the same problem with alcohol. If you have a bad day at work, we'll get high. You have a fight with your wife, we'll get high. Watching a football game, it's boring, we'll get high. Now it's interesting. It's just the drugs become the answer to whatever the question is, and it doesn't matter. And weed definitely fills that as well. And weed is starting to hit this point of becoming more and more socially acceptable. So now it has the same problem as alcohol. In a lot of cities, even in Texas, redneck Texas, most of the big cities don't really prosecute marijuana possession anymore. If you've got like a small amount, it even kind of depends on the discretion of the cop. He may just make you throw out the weed, may give it to him so he can go home and smoke it himself. Prosecutors are not very interested in prosecuting simple possession charges. Judges usually won't. If there's some extenuating circumstances, they might, but even then we're talking about a ticket, a fine, do some community service, But then again, you get some other places in Texas where they will take your ass to jail, they will remove your kids, they will destroy your life, that sort of thing. But in general, overall, the mood of the country is that we are more and more accepting of weed. That's why I have a lot more debates with people on how addictive it really is and how bad it is for you, because it really does take over their life. So in many ways, someone with an addiction to marijuana has the same problem of like some people with depression is, and again, it's a depressant, that they tend to want to just sit and do nothing. Just like depression saps your motivation, it saps your energy, it saps your desire to even do anything or change, and marijuana does the same sort of thing. So they can make kind of boring characters, unless you want to start off showing them as that sort of person and then make them growing out of it as the character arc, because it's just, these are people who just don't really do much. Why would they? I think the last drug I want to talk about is psychedelics. Very broad term, just because these are very interesting drugs. They are not addictive, unlike the other drugs that's talked about. They are not really that addictive. Ketamine is the most addictive of all the psychedelics. Ironically, it's the one that's legal. Go figure. But even the addictive quality of ketamine is nothing compared to like heroin or even alcohol or anything else like that. They are generally safe. Usually the worst case scenario with psychedelics is you mix too many psychedelics and you screw yourself up. I had one client that did that. He did a large amount of LSD, and then at the peak of his high, he decided to smoke DMT, and now he has like permanent psychosis. Not really bad. He was still able to kind of function, but he constantly sees things now. And if you want to get into the realm of the spiritual, maybe he's actually seeing the spirits. But whatever it is, it was making it really hard for him to function in this reality. But in general, psychedelics are safe. Usually the unsafe quality is what you do when you're on the psychedelics, and that's why you want to do them in a safe environment. You want to do them with maybe a trip sitter or a sober buddy or something else like that. Psychedelics are very interesting because they can be very powerful. They can open up your consciousness in a way that no other drug can. I've done a few shrooms myself in my time, and ketamine, all for therapeutic purposes, not illegal. But they're not really addictive in the sense that you don't necessarily want to seek that out. Some people will, but what they're really seeking out is the escape. Again, they're trying to dissociate. And so they're using psychedelics a lot like the way people will drink or smoke weed or use heroin or something else. They just want to check out and not be in this reality. But the psychedelics oftentimes are kind of intense, especially when you get into like the teacher plants. Shrooms are not plants, but we kind of lump them in there. But psychedelic mushrooms, ayahuasca, San Pedro or Mescal, depending on what you want to call it. These are drugs that when you take them, they will show up and they will try and teach you something. And sometimes their lessons are kind of harsh. And that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people don't really like psychedelics, is because they, you just want to, eat a cap of shrooms and listen to some music, and the shrooms are like, nah, we're going to talk about your stepdad. Yeah, I'm going to talk about my stepdad. Yeah, we're going to talk about your stepdad. Oh, by the way, we're going to do it for 4 hours. And it's going to feel like 1,000 years to you, but so that's one of the hard parts, I think, with psychedelics. And psychedelics, particularly the teacher plants, they will turn themselves off. The last time I did shrooms, I was basically told, don't come back. You're done. We've told you all we're going to tell you. Just stop. If you come back, you're going to have a bad trip. That was kind of the impression I got. And if you follow a lot of other YouTubers that talk about their psychedelics use, a lot of them just don't use it anymore. They used it a lot in the past, and they have whole channels talking about the different kinds and all this other stuff. But a lot of them will say they don't do it anymore. The guys who run a podcast, it's called Psychedelics Today, and of course, it's all about psychedelics and about the research and how effective they are and how great they are. But they'll even tell you now they do a lot of breath work. They don't even do psychedelics. And so it's very interesting that these are very powerful drugs, but also not very addictive at all. But they are still can be dangerous because they are so powerful. And so my hope is we will see psychedelics being used more in a therapeutic background. But we still need to be very kind of cautious. These are very powerful drugs. And I don't want it to go the way of weed, where everybody's being told how great they are and how wonderful they are without really being warned about, well, there's just all this other stuff behind it too that you got to be careful of. So anyway. But yeah, I think that was enough rambling about drugs. And I'm sure you're aware I left out whole chunks of them. I didn't really talk about cocaine at all, except for context of crack. What else? I left out all the prescription drugs except for the opioids, but that's the sort of big drugs that at least I as a counselor deal with for the most part, and also a little bit of like the drugs I think people would be interested in a sort of fiction setting. But yeah, if there's anything else you want to hear about, any particular drugs or anything, just put it in the comments. I'll come up with something, and I'll try and give you a good answer to that. But anyway, I will talk to you later. Bye.